Hello, and thanks for joining us for this next session, Ethically Highlighting Diverse Voices Through Cataloging Data. We're joined today by Misty Alvaro, whose pronouns are they, them. Misty is the Cataloging and Processing Manager for Columbus Metropolitan Library. My name is Eliana Franco, and I'm the Marketing Director for BiblioCommons. Before we start the session, I want to remind you that you can say hello to session attendees or ask questions to our presenters by using the chat panel on the right side of the screen. And if you'd like, you can turn on a live transcript by clicking on the button located at the bottom of the video stream on the purple bar. The transcript of this session will be available upon request. And with all of that said, I will hand things over to Misty to take it away.
Hey, thank you, Eliana. So hello, I am Misty. I'm the Misty in question. And this is kind of a massive topic and a very short presentation. So this is just my disclaimer. I also want to let you all know upfront that while this is technically cataloging related, I am going to steer clear of technical details. I don't want to speak MARC at anyone more than I absolutely have to. So we're hitting the high level concepts. If you want to dork out with me on the minutia, please feel free to email me later. My email address is at the end of the presentation. So spine labels, genreification, curated. I mean, everybody loves these, right? These are the buzzwords when we're getting into shelving and labeling talk. They're hot button issues that people don't really discuss often enough, in my opinion. A lot of times we just come up with ideas and we run with it because it sounds great and our friends are doing it. So what's wrong with spine labels? Oftentimes nothing. There's nothing inherently wrong with them anyway. They can be great, desirable, helpful, wayfinders. Traditional genre fiction, for example, you would like a spine label for that. Test prep books, ESOL collections, these are all great opportunities to put them, or special shelving situations, special collections, oversized books, right? But it gets a little bit tricky when we start trying to do DEI work on the spine of a book. So one of the issues is that obviously there's a limit to how many labels you can put on the spine of a book before you completely cover the whole thing. There are other shelving guides and wayfinders for the public that we put on there, so it can get a little muddied as to the purpose of it. And it's just not practical to shelve things in more than one place, right? So let's say you have a creator who is, let's say, Cuban-American, gay, and it's a large print book, right? So if you have three different labels on the spine of that book and you want to shelve a copy of that book in 3 different places, that gets so confusing for people who do shelving and pulling holds at your library. So how do we categorize someone moving through the world with multiple identities? How do we choose which label then, if we're going to shelve it in one place, right? We decided we didn't want to. I mean, that's really, there's your spoilers for the whole thing. We decided we didn't want to have to make a choice on our end about how other people define themselves. So there's that part. There's also the question of genre bending, more practically, outside of the DEI lens. Sci-fi romance happens, historical horror happens. Picking one of those is not always aligning with the author's intention, or even the publisher's intention sometimes. We're making our best guesses with best intentions, of course, but that's a tricky thing to do, right? To just put something into a corner that it maybe doesn't truly fit into. So this all started for us, this whole idea of using catalog data to do our DEI work with an African-American fiction collection that we had here at Columbus Metropolitan Libraries. It really did what we needed it to do at a certain point in time, but its parameters were really limited, and I don't think our communities fully understood what the collection was. So it was non-genre fiction for teens and adults by African-American creators that was theoretically relevant to the African-American experience. So kind of let that settle for a second and think about all the holes in that. Like Helen Oyeyemi, for example, is a hole in that because she is a wonderful Black author who is not African-American. N.K. Jemisin has explicitly said she doesn't want her sci-fi books to be shelved with African-American books, even if we had been including genre fiction. Black Canadians, right? There are a lot of people who are excluded from this. And our customers, we had evidence when we started making changes to this that they really didn't fully understand what the collection was. When we announced that we were changing the way that we handle these books, we heard people say, but what, you're getting rid of all the Black books? And they're like, oh, wow, no, not even a little bit, right? We also heard people say, well, that section wasn't really for me, so I don't know what was in there. So we really wanted to find a way to shelve these books with their content, right? But find a way to identify the creators. Because, as we all know, users are not reading our collection development policies. So they didn't really have access to that idea of even looking at it, right? So what makes a book diverse? This has been a really tricky thing to suss out because we tend to look at images a lot of times and make decisions based on that. I've seen a lot of libraries where they will put a spine label on if there are characters in hijab, if there are Black characters, visually dark-skinned characters, I should say. Historically, the diversity of our titles has been entirely determined by content, right? Relative or relevant to the lived experiences of a group. So where do we find that information? Most of the time, I did not mean to scroll that hard. Most of the time that comes from vendor catalogs. It comes from blogs, it comes from lists we get from publishers and vendors. And there is value in that, don't get me wrong, especially for a collection development department that may be very small. So skipping ahead from that, that is just where we have found it to date. But that data itself is coming from keywords, it's coming from book industry standard subject headings. And, we're not necessarily highlighting the author's identity there. There was this whole movement towards own voices for a while, which became also problematic. It didn't necessarily have a rigorous framework for making those distinctions and putting a label on someone, right? So I want you to think as we go through the rest of this, what factors do you look for when trying to consider if a book is diverse? So our next big question that we had as a group was, what about these people over here? We were trying to figure out, so if we were going to keep an African-American fiction collection in one place, maybe we should also have an Asian American fiction collection and a Hispanic and Latin American fiction collection, right? We were trying to think of all these different things, at which point, if you do that, your fiction collection becomes this straight white Western default, right? Which we really didn't want to do either, right? I don't think that's what most of us want to do. There's just a lot of complexity to the nature of identity too. So if we are choosing to label someone as Asian American, but they identify as mixed race, as Korean and African American, we're making a choice for them that is not necessarily, oh, darn it, I keep doing that, I'm so sorry, that is not necessarily appropriate. We all have multiple identities as we move through the world. We can talk about ethnicity, race, citizenship, gender, sexuality. I think these are the big ones in libraries, a lot of times religion as well. But socioeconomic factors or educational levels, abilities and disabilities, these are all things that come into how we describe ourselves. If we use labels to tell our users about creators' identities, we can cover the whole spine, right? And if we choose only one identity, we may be choosing something as primary that the author doesn't agree with. So let's say we do label all of the identities our customers and staff want to find. We label Indigenous peoples, African and Asian diasporas, mixed race people, at which point we have to reckon with what the default looks like. So think in terms of what people want to find, how they want to find it, and what feedback you've gotten about that. And what are your identities? How do you line up with some of the things that you're trying to describe? So as we were trying to solve this all, we discovered MARC field 386. And this is the only MARC I'm talking to you guys about today, I promise. This is just a number that is used for a specific new area of information in MARC. So new tags are added all the time to the MARC standard. Well, frequently, let's not say all the time. I think the proposal for this one landed in like 2013, but it is still not commonly used in shared databases. So you will see it here and there. And there's another one around the same time that was numbered 385 that was used for audience characteristics. 386 specifically is creator or contributor characteristics. And we typically use terms from a controlled list, like the Library of Congress subject headings or their demographic group terms list. So we're seeing more of the audience one at this point, interestingly, than we are for the creator characteristics. So now that we had a MARC field to think about, and I left links in here for you to poke around with later if you do get the presentation after the fact, we looked at that feedback from users. How were they looking for authors by identity? Why were they looking for authors by identity, right? We have Heritage Month celebrations in place nationally and locally. Kids get school assignments, read something by an Indigenous author. Sometimes we want to make displays that highlight specific portions of our collections so that our communities can see themselves in our buildings. So we knew this was something that was important to people and it was worth the work. We have primarily chosen to work with the Library of Congress demographic group terms list. We don't always agree with the terms they've chosen. Sometimes the Library of Congress subject headings have a better term. Sometimes when we're dealing with LGBTQIA identities, Homosaurus is a great choice. Homosaurus is fantastic. It has the best logo in the world. So I recommend you look that one up if you're not familiar. If none of those really have a term that sits well with our community, or that is succinct enough to describe what we need to describe, we will apply local terms. And we have done that in a few situations to sort of co-locate things as necessary. So here's where BiblioCommons comes in. Those new fields are rarely indexed in a unique way quickly after they're being created. So this is where BiblioCommons staff helped us. When you search a new field, typically, you can find the words that are in that MARC field in a keyword search, right? But that also pulls from text everywhere else in the record. We wanted to be able to search just this field. So we wanted to be able to search the phrase African American, but not as a subject, not as a keyword. We wanted it as an author identity only to have that unique search for it. So they configured the local heading search for us, the LH colon, to only search the 386 field. And this was magical for us. This changed everything. It's a very simple thing, I think, that made a huge difference. This way, we were able to do saved searches in our catalog with a diverse voices button, is what we call it. And this openly promotes our diverse collections, of course, but it's also really easy to use. I'm going to show you a bunch of screenshots. So this is just a quick view of our website. And you see we have the diverse voices button here. And here, if you get bugged about the alphabetical part, I am too. I already put in a message to IT so they can fix that. This should read Hispanic and Latin American, then LGBTQIA+. There's a limit to sort of how much text we can put there. That is inherently built into the product. That's not necessarily something that can be easily tweaked. But it's given us what we need to at least include broad diasporas. Now, once you click on that, you can actually see the search text here, right? It tells you what the advanced search is that is saved in that button. And we have over 4,000 titles that were identified as being the work of African-American creators. So that was kind of a cool moment for us too, to have that instantaneous recognition of how much of our collection seemed to be by African-American creators. Another cool thing about it is that you can use the advanced search to maybe get a little bit more specific with things. So I mentioned before that people of Asian descent, for example, may have multiple identities. Somebody might be Hmong and Thai, for example. If you want to choose specific identities, you can do that with an advanced search. If we included all of the terms that we labeled in this saved search, it would take up your whole screen and be an absolute nightmare in the mobile display. So we chose to use sort of a blanket term that reflects the text in the button for each one. And then we're doing some education for staff and customers around the more specific terms available. We want to talk quickly about our rigorous and intentional framework that we are using for naming people, because it is a fundamental human right for people to determine what they are called. We have staff members who research every person in question to find out what they call themselves publicly. Again, multiple terms are possible for each person, so we'll make a note if we find multiple identities. Let's say we're working on the Asian diaspora, we find someone is also part of the African diaspora, we'll put their terms there for later use as well. Never, ever, ever use pictures of people. It is never okay. If a blogger puts out a list of their favorite Asian American authors, that's their word, not necessarily that of the authors. So without really reliable information about how they chose that term, we avoid that. So we have two rules in this group. One is self-identification is essential. The other one is if it makes you feel funny, poke it with a stick. And we have really worked through a lot of great things together that way. So many hands make light work, my friends. I hope that at least some of you are inspired to do some of this work yourselves, maybe chip away at it in your shared databases. And this is just going to make so much more information available to the community at large so much faster. Thank you. And I love questions. So if you don't have any today, I do hope you will use my very tiny email address at the bottom of the slide.
Misty, we actually do have questions for you, so I'm just going to start sharing some of them. Katie from San Antonio Public Library asks, how did you populate the 386 field in records that did not already have it?
So what we've been doing is we create lists in Excel. We have other staff who actually work with collections regularly who go through and find specific terms. They actually search our catalog for those creators, add all of their titles to a record set is what we have in Polaris. And then we can bulk change the bib records and add the terms that way. I have written some SQL queries as well to look at a record set and say, I want to search in this list for anything that doesn't have a 386 field with this specific text in it. So we have some kind of check digits built into that I run on the lists every now and then.
Okay. So you've got a perfected system in place.
What's that?
You've got a perfected system in place.
Oh, it's getting there. I wouldn't say perfect. I avoid that word at all costs, but it's getting better. Yeah.
We also had Valerie from Snow Owl Libraries ask, or she said, first of all, she loves this idea. How did you locate author characteristics? And relatedly, how do you keep from outing authors? And then it's kind of a bit of a follow-up. And Julie from Marin County said, yes, was there a retroactive cataloging project?
So most of this work is retroactive. Speaking to the second part of that first, we're still working on how to sort of fit this into the regular cataloging workflow as new materials come in. So let's see, let's go back. The first question was, how do I find those author characteristics and avoid outing people? The beauty of insisting on self-identification, right, is if someone has spoken publicly about themselves, then we know that they are comfortable with the world at large knowing this fact about them. And that is why self-identification is crucial. We find this in publisher bios, which are consistently vetted by the authors themselves. We find them on authors' web pages, awards that they have accepted, professional organizations they have joined. A lot of the ones I have found that have been sort of harder to find, I have found in the text of interviews. And like I've scrubbed through YouTube videos, not even kidding, trying to find these. So I don't think we've been concerned about outing because we are insisting on public self-identification as a factor. There was another part to that question that I think I missed.
No, I actually think you were good. No, you were fine. Yeah.
To make the list, there is another piece I want to throw in there, though. To make the list that we start with, we're actually experimenting with AI right now. We're asking ChatGPT and other resources to give us a list of authors who self-identify as Mexican American, for example. And then we still research them. That's just our starting point. So finding the starting points is probably the trickiest part.
For sure. And Diana from Hamilton Public Library asks, can you share any feedback you have received from your library members or users?
Absolutely. Staff love it. Staff absolutely love it when they want to make displays, or if a kid comes in with a school project, it has made their lives a lot easier. The way BiblioCommons works too, you have all those filters off to the side. So once you run this diverse voices search, you can continue to filter that down. They have been very fond of that. capacity to be able to do that. So they can limit by age, like audience, if the thing is in at their location right now, like say fiction, nonfiction, physical book, ebook. So staff have loved it. Customers, we're still kind of teaching them about it, I think. We have started to get more and more questions about it. I will say nobody's hated it, which, I've never had a project before where nobody hated it. So I'm calling that a good sign. Let's see, I think we're about 1.5 years in. And so it's working out pretty well.
Yeah, that's good. It does sound like it's working out when there is no hate out there.
No,
Vanessa's from Peninsula Library System, and she asked, does the use of 386 intersect with your authority work?
Great question. So Polaris is where our authority work happens. And Polaris has not really identified 386 as an authority field yet. So it isn't really showing up in our authority module, if you will. So while we're updating terms, we maintain lists that we can bulk change as necessary if there are major changes in terminology. As we all know, there often are. So we wanted to keep a list that would be easy to edit in the future.
Okay, thank you. And Kim from Orangeville Public Library wants to know if you've had any luck in getting that information included with your records from suppliers.
Oh, so our primary supplier for records is OCLC. We do all of our own cataloging in-house. And that's really where we have been looking for it. And we are seeing more and more of those audience characteristics fields, the 385 field, which gives me hope that people might be starting to think about dipping their toes in to the creator characteristics as well. Generally speaking, no, we have not seen this data out there. We tried using one of our diversity collection analysis products, and it gave us a bunch of white people who like to write about Asia, which is a thing, right? I mean, white people can write about other places, but it makes it tricky when you're looking for specific DEI information.
Okay. And Danielle wants to know, do you plan to label books for people who are white, hetero, etc., so you can get info on the entire collection? And Danielle's from San Diego County Library.
So we have actually talked about doing that. It is a lower priority, of course, because the bulk of most collections are by white hetero people, cishet even. So I think it is something we've talked about doing eventually so that everyone is identified. I don't think we would, we wouldn't save them in a saved search for diverse voices, but it would be nice to have that data as well when we can identify that information.
Okay. And Vanessa from Peninsula Library System wants to know, do you consider a SH project instead? Why did you choose this route?
What was the first part?
Do you consider a SH project instead?
Subject heading project. Well, no, because we already have subject heading projects that are very separate, and those just tell us about the content of the book. They don't tell us about the creators. And we wanted to make a distinction there. We wanted kids in a predominantly Black neighborhood to be able to find math textbooks written by a Black mathematician, for example, in which case there is nothing in the content there that would reflect the author's identity.
Okay, makes sense. Oh, I just had another question pop in from Robert at Multnomah County Library. Have you run into situations where an author self-identifies with a particular group, but that self-identification is controversial? That's a good question.
I would love to know more about what you mean by that, Robert. How is the self-identification controversial? I think the only one we've really had to talk about, if I'm interpreting your question correctly, is criollos, which is a Creole in South America. So it's a different kind of Creole. It is a Creole, not Creole, capital C. So criollos and criollas are people who are sort of white Hispanic people in South America. We really went back and forth with how to identify them and if they were diverse creators still. Ultimately, we decided that we are identifying cultural heritage, not necessarily just race. So while there is no controlled term for criollos, if they also identify as, say, Argentinian, we would include them in that list.
Okay. So, Robert, I hope that, he provided an answer right now. So if he says, if I were to say I'm a Black woman, but I'm a white man.
Oh, yeah. We have actually found some folks in that vein. And it's tricky because how do I know you're a white man if you tell me you're a Black woman, right? We can't use pictures of people to make these distinctions. And there are people who identify as Black who photograph looking very, very pale. So we are trying not to make those distinctions unless there is public controversy about someone self-identifying. Generally speaking, we haven't really run into that more than, strangely, a couple of white women from Ohio who love to write about the Gullah people of South Carolina, who are an African-American population. And they position themselves as sort of experts on this and sort of try to hide their identities a little bit. But we're librarians and we dig, so.
Well, Misty, thank you so much for answering all the questions. If anyone has any other questions, please add them to the session. And yeah, have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks so much, Misty.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.